Good morning. I'm a little bit loud here this morning. Appreciate your being here. Thank you if you're a guest. Hope that you'll come back to see us again sometime very soon. I see some who are guests and welcome them. We're nearing the end of the year and time marches on. Won't be too long before we're celebrating the new year. And that holds all the potentialities, all the hopes. There's a poem that has meant a lot to me over the years. It says, with every rising of the sun, think of your life as just begun. The past has concealed and buried deep all yesterdays. There let them sleep. Concern yourself with but today. Grasp it and teach it to obey your will and plan. Since time began, today has been the friend of man. You and today, a soul sublime in the great heritage of time. With God himself to bind the twain, go forth, brave heart, attain, attain. We need to be positive and optimistic. We need to look to the potential of the future. We need to look at what God has given us, and it's worthy of our remembering that all good and perfect gifts come down from above, from the Father of light, in whom there's no variableness nor shadow of turning, according to the book of James. It's also worth considering that time is moving faster. I'm not quite sure how that works, what sort of law of physics is involved, but you remember, some of you haven't got there yet, but do you remember when 30 seemed old? I don't want anyone laughing. I think I heard a snicker or two. Now you're looking at your 40th high school reunion or more, and it doesn't seem like that could be possible. Where's the time gone? And how have we used it? Have we put it to good use? And how much time do we have left? None of us know. James 4 talks about those who should rather say, if the Lord will, we'll go into such a city and buy and sell and get gain. We need to recall that all of our days are numbered, and the Lord knows the number of our days. How are we going to use the time that remains to us? It's not as much as it was yesterday or a year ago. How are we going to use it? Despite whatever circumstances have come our way, we still have to deal with the present and anticipate the future. What will be the sum of the equation when our life is added up? Will it be good or not? How will we count it? Life is brief. I hinted at this verse. James 4:14, you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It's as a vapor. It's here for a little while and then it vanishes away. And then he goes into the point about making sure that you'll credit God with what's going to happen. We sing a hymn, swiftly we're turning life's daily pages. Swiftly the hours are changing to years. How are you using God's precious minutes? Will you reap sorrow? Will you reap tears? And then he says, into our hands the gospel is given. John Wesley, the famous Methodist preacher, said, "O Lord, let me not live to be useless." And I think that's a very important task in our lives, is to make sure that at whatever we find ourselves, we're useful, that we have a sense of purpose, that we pursue something that is worthwhile. Somebody else said, when you were born, you cried and everyone else rejoiced. Live in a way so that when you die, everyone else cries and you rejoice. Be awful, wouldn't it be? So they'd be the opposite of the little poem, the little cartoon strip of Peanuts. You all know the characters Linus and Lucy and Charlie Brown. And Lucy says, my life or life is like a deck chair. Some place it so they can see where they're going. Some place it so they can see where they've been. and some place it so they can see where they are at present. Charlie Brown, ever the loser, says, I can't even get my deck chair unfolded. You have days like that when the deck chair just won't unfold. So another year has nearly passed us by. What is it, a week and a half, 2 weeks? What is today, the 17th? So we've got a little over a week. What have we accomplished? What can we say we've done with the year that we've had to use? Jeremiah had a concern. He said in chapter 8 and verse 20, the harvest is done, the summer is ended, and we're not saved. The people of Judah were not doing what they needed to do. They weren't living according to the covenant. And so Jeremiah was concerned. And eternity alone is going to reveal how we've used our lives, whether we've made the right use of time, whether we've been dedicated to the right or to the wrong. I'd like tonight to talk a little bit more about that dedication to the right. But for today, let's go on with this. Someone wrote a little piece that said a man's life is either a tumbleweed or an oak tree. Some people just grow like the weed. They're of no value in their youth. As their years of life come, they break loose and become a blotch on society. They have no useful purpose in life, just drifters. Their loved ones mourn their loss, but society will not miss them. Then there are those whose lives are like the oak tree. They've turned from the frivolity of this life and have invested in things that have genuine worth. Their influence for good will live on in the lives of others after the gone. Their death is lives were spent bettering the nation and the community. They will be missed. I don't believe the man was writing this in a religious vein, but it fits. Will we be missed or will we just be gone? James Russell Lowell, poet, wrote, life is like a paper white, whereupon each of us may write his word or two. And then comes night. Greatly begin, though you have time, but for a line, be that sublime, not failure, but low aim is crime. We need to aspire to doing great things. We need to dedicate ourselves to the high and not to the low. We as Christians of all people should be dedicated to doing what is good. There's a story that says in trying to recruit John Scully, at that time the 38-year-old president of PepsiCo, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computer, issued a tremendous challenge to Scully. He said, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar water, or do you want to have a chance to change the world? And that's a challenge for Christians. Do we spend our time on frivolous things, or do we spend our time on good, whatever form it may take? Isaac Disraeli, I think he was a diplomat of a former year, said it is a wretched thing or taste to be gratified with mediocrity when the excellent lies before us. You and I have the capability of doing excellent things. I knew a fellow once who said, I may not be perfect, but parts of me are excellent. And I think in some ways I know what he meant, for I knew the parts that weren't so good. But he said, I'm trying to be excellent. Philippians 4 and 8 reminds us, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest or honorable, depending on your translation, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely and of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So our mind should be set on the virtuous, on the good, on the positive, on the constructive, and not dwell on things that are negative. Again in Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, this I pray, love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense to the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So our lives eventually either glorify God or they do not. What are you doing with your life? How are you living? Are you glorifying God? John D. Rockefeller, one of the great names of the early 20th century, perhaps one of the wealthiest men then living, and I believe he was known for his benevolence. I believe that every right implies a responsibility, every opportunity an obligation, every possession a duty. And I believe that he went about doing good things. Wouldn't agree with him on everything, but he had a good idea here to live for God. So, where are we going? With a new year in front of us, with an old year fading in the past very rapidly, where are we headed? Someone said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Yogi Berra, a baseball player of a former time, was known for making funny remarks taken from common sayings. And he says, if you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up somewhere else. Where are we going? Are we going where we wish? Or are we going to wind up someplace else? There are priorities to be considered. John Lancaster Spaulding said, what we love to do is what we find time to do. Do you find time for noble things? Do you make time for church? How many of you will be back this evening or perhaps Wednesday evening? What will be your decision? We all find time to do what we really want to do, said William Feather. Matthew 6 says it best. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Are we seeking God's righteousness first? God's righteousness amounts to what the Bible tells us to do. God's righteousness amounts to the gospel call. God's righteousness requires of us discipleship. Are we living in a way that reflects that? Robert Herrick, a poet of a long time ago, wrote a little quadrant that says, gather ye rosebuds while you may, old time is still a-flying, and that same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. We only have a little time to take advantage of our opportunities. How will we use them? Will we spend them in a good way? Ephesians 5 says, see that you walk circumspectly, looking around, being not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore, don't be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do you understand what the will of the Lord is? All you have to do to find that out is to pick this up and to read it, to carry it into your life, to put it to use. Ovid, a writer from the Roman period, said, winged time glides on insensibly and deceives us. And there's nothing more fleeting than years. Time's a flying. Time marches on. Psalm 90 says, for all our days are passed away in thy wrath, and we spend our years as a tale that is told. Some translations say we spend our years as a sigh. The days of our years are 80 years and 10, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years. Yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. So teach us to number our days. We may apply our hearts unto wisdom. That's a prayer that I have. Do you have that prayer? Help me, Father, to have the wisdom to do what I ought to do, to be what I ought to be, to think the things I ought to think, to live the way I ought to live. Is that your prayer? Think about it. Consider adding it to the prayer list. God gives us the precious gift of life. Life is made up of minutes and hours and days, and all of them pass away in just a little bit. If you don't believe that time flies, did you look at the clock more than once this morning, ready for services? Where did the time go? A finished record of how we've chosen to use our time. So from this point onward, let's use it well. Let's realize that God gives it to us and that we will be accountable for it. If this morning you're not a Christian, then think about becoming one. Believing in Jesus, profess your faith, having repented your sin, and let someone baptize you into Christ as instructed in the Bible. And if you need prayers of the church, then why don't you let us know about it as together we stand and while we sing.